Better than we have.
I know.
Hey, guys.
Hey, I have to wait for Avery to get down here and then I'm gonna take our group of people to the conference room. So it'll be a little bit till we're all on.
No problem.
And I guess Megan and Sadie, you guys can come if you want to.
I'm gonna try to multitask a little bit and pay attention to part of this and then go to that K3 meeting, so.
And I've got it recorded right now, so it's recording right now,
Oh, perfect.
even though it's a little bit early. I thought better to have it. Should I pause the recording? How do I know when other people are trying to get in? Click on the Hi, everyone. This is going to be kind of a funny, not funny, haha, but like a little bit different Zoom. And if you do have background noise, then by all means, you can mute yourself. But I'd really like you guys to feel free to ask questions. So feel free to unmute yourself.
Okay.
For those of you just joining, I was going to say, please feel free to unmute yourself if you want to be asking questions. If there's background noise or something like that, and you want that not to be a part of, you know, what's going on, then just mute yourself. But I really, really want you to be able to ask questions. So. And I'm not sure if I can see who's all on here right now. Hey, Robin. I was just inviting everybody, whoever wants to unmute themselves, you're more than welcome to do that. If there's background noise, then you can put it back on, but I really would like people to be able to ask questions. And just know that it's being recorded. Actually, it's already being recorded. So I just promise that, because I know there's quite a few people that couldn't get on live today, and they're going to be watching that later. So thank you guys for all being here. I think we'll go ahead and get started. And it might take some bearing with me a little bit just to make sure this is sharing screen. I'm just kind of starting to like do this. Okay. I'm expecting a couple more. Hopefully they'll show up and I'll be able to get an alert that somebody. All right. So we're going to get started here. Can I just get the thumbs up? Everybody ready to get going? Yep. All right. Hey, everyone. Thanks for joining me today. I am really excited about sharing the information that I have been learning from the CVI classes that I've been taking. For some of you who don't know me, my name is Jodie Scherr. I graduated with my elementary and special education degree with what was then called a vision specialty from UND in 1988, which I know dates name. My first contracted teaching position, here we go. My first contracted teaching position was here in our very own Cheyenne Valley Special Education Unit. And at that time, Wynn Griebel was my director. And he asked me, hang on a second, close the window. I'll be a little bit quieter here. He had asked me to set up the vision program within the unit. Now, really not much had been done in terms of help for the visually impaired before that time in the public school system, because students were primarily served residentially at the North Dakota Blind School. So in the 1980s, there came the passage of the American for Disabilities Act. And with that, the movement of deinstitutionalization. So those students who had previously been served at the blind school now had the right to be served in their home district. At that time, back when I was teaching way back when, there was a young student who was completely blind, and he was enrolled as a first grader here at Washington School, where I'm at right now again. And it became my job to teach him how to read in Braille, as well as set up the vision program. Let me tell you, that was a really big undertaking. This little guy came from out of state, and he had received no services up until that point. And It was also the first time that mainstreaming had really been practiced in Valley City Public Schools. So my student was in the first grade classroom, and that first grade classroom teacher was Amy Anderson, our now director, Tracy Zahn's mom. So together, Amy and I forged a new pathway for special education students within our school system. It was the first time really that mainstreaming had been done here. It was a really exciting time. I taught here for a while, and in part to that experience, I decided to go back to law school with the idea of becoming a better advocate for people in need. And it wasn't until 2016 that I came back to teach as what is now referred to as a TVI, or a teacher of the visually impaired. And I was hired by Tracy into the same program that I had initiated 25 years almost earlier. So full circle there. While I had retained my teaching license, I had not taught in the vision field during that time. And I quickly learned that while some things were the same, a lot of the Braille things were the same, there were a lot of things that had changed. And I was fortunate enough to have a friend and a mentor in Linda Kraft, who got me reacquainted with the latest best practices. Linda worked for the North Dakota Vision Services, and she had served as an early interventionist with several of the students on my caseload. And they had already had just some really great foundational work done with them. She was a godsend. As she talked about the field, she kept though referring to CVI. And I, kind of played along with it for a while. I had no idea really what she was talking about. It felt like it was something I should know what she was talking about, but I really didn't. And then finally I asked, and she explained to me that this was an area that had really only recently become recognized in our area of North Dakota. When I say our area, although it had been on the burner in the East Coast for several years. Linda provided some materials to me so that I could learn more, and I found it to be just fascinating. And that's how and where my journey into CVI began. So at any point, please raise your hand or unmute yourself if you have questions. I'm going to kind of set up now what our sessions are going to look like. Right now, we're planning on having 5 sessions. The first one is this, what is CVI? And we're going to watch a couple videos and just kind of lay a foundation for that. The second session will be about causes and identification and diagnosis of CVI, who can and cannot do what. The third session is the characteristics of CVI. And we may go back and forth between 2 and 3. They go kind of hand in hand. The fourth one is the implications of CVI. And the fifth one, which I know a lot of people are probably really interested in, is the strategies and interventions. And we may combine that to kind of with the implications of CVI so that we can spend some time learning more about how to help these kiddos out. So, what is CVI in this session today? What are we going to be doing? Well, I am going to try really hard to keep within the 1 hour time frame. It may be shorter than that, just so that you're aware. But I know everybody, and it's a lot of information. That's why I'm trying to break it down into 5 sessions. Again, if there's anything you don't understand, or with confidentiality in mind, want to ask a question about something, please feel free to do that. That's part of the fun of teaching, is being able to engage with each other and in doing that. And I just, again, really thank each one of you who signed up today and are doing this, because I feel so passionately about CVI, because I've just been learning so much about it. Hopefully, we can kind of spread the word and just start looking out for kiddos. So today we're going to look at what the basic definition is of CVI. We're going to look at a couple of videos. I think that makes it more interesting than just listening to me drone. The second is we're going to talk about having a basic understanding of the brain. And then we're going to go through a series of videos from Dr. Gordon Dutton from CVI Scotland. So any questions so far? Not so far, okay. All right, so what is CVI? In a nutshell, it is an issue of visual recognition, okay? CVI, some people in the United States, it's called cortical vision impairment, but in Europe and becoming more now in the United States with a more medical-based research component of it, it's called cerebral. They both start with a C, so it works out well. We just call it CVI. But CVI is a brain-based visual impairment. It occurs due to the brain having difficulties in processing visual information. Okay, so it's a processing disorder. And it affects the ability to interpret and understand what is being seen. And we'll see some of that, how what we think everybody can see just isn't the same for each individual. Okay. I'm going to try to do something here. Katie Sather, you can't laugh at me too hard. I am going to attempt to play a video now. And this video is just kind of a neat way to get started. You know, I'll start with this one. I hope it's not going on up there. How do I get it to there? Just a second, I'm getting to share it so that. You can laugh at me, Sadie, because I actually have my husband here having to help me. I knew that might happen. Okay. Can you guys all see Miles okay?
You want it?
Yeah.
Ask her Jody,
Yeah,
can you add Oaks admin to the meeting? We're having trouble with the connect or trouble
I
trying to hear you.
just did. Can you guys hear that at all?
Yeah.
You can. Folks, are you able to get on?
Yep, we're here.
And then can you guys hear it okay? No. Okay, so let's start over. There was something back here that I did that made it go louder or softer.
We're not hearing the video down in Oaks.
Okay, we're trying here. The system. There you go. I think we got it. Can you guys hear that? This might be louder if we don't hear it.
No,
And then at our first visit to
Can you
ophthalmology,
hear it now?
we were told that Miles was blind and that it was
Okay, I'm just
unclear
gonna
whether
just
or
start
not
at
that he
that.
had any light perception.
I think, just a second.
And we started kind of noticing that he was starting to develop some visual skills first, and then his right side.
Bear with me. Okay, here we go. This is, yeah, sorry about that.
Miles was born, 2017. And for his 1 month well check, and they sent him to Children's Hospital for some liver concerns. So he ended up being diagnosed with alpha-1 antitrypsin shortly after 1 month. He had high bilirubin levels, and he was just like really lethargic and sleeping most of the time. And at our first visit to ophthalmology, we were told that Miles was blind and that it was unclear whether or not that he had any light perception. And we started kind of noticing that he was starting to develop some visual skills, and they kind of developed like on his left side first and then his right side. So then at our next ophthalmology appointment, we got the diagnosis of delayed visual maturation. His first birthday came and went, and his vision still wasn't typical. And delayed visual maturation typically resolves itself by a year. So then, like, we weren't really expecting like a magical cure, you know, by his first birthday to all of a sudden be like, oh, it's great. But we were expecting a little bit more improvement because he was still struggling with his vision daily. He had a fall down the stairs when he was like 18 months old, broke his arm. So we continued with VIPS, and then we also started with first steps. So we had occupational therapy and speech that got added in as well. And then his second birthday came and went, and he was still having inconsistencies with his vision and struggling with that on a daily basis. So then when he was like 2.5, like right at 2.5 years old, we kind of asked at our next appointment if there was maybe a different diagnosis that we could start looking into. So we got referred to the CVI clinic at Children's, and he got an official diagnosis when he was 2.5. After his diagnosis of CVI, we kind of changed the way that we like played at home. I know we focused more on playing games that like describe salient features. So we have a game, like a guess who game, but you like put a character on your face and then everybody has to guess who it is. So we spend a lot of time like talking about different features of like objects or people or animals. And we like to play Spot It a lot, just so we can kind of help increase like his ability to recognize objects within a complex image. And then when we go places, like when we go on hikes or do different activities outside, he always asks to take his binocular with him. So he'll ask to take his binocular with him, and I think he uses it just to kind of like decrease all the background clutter. Like, I don't think he necessarily needs it for like acuity reasons, but it just kind of helps him like hone in on one object when he can like get all the rest of that visual background out of the way. Before his CVI diagnosis, I guess I was unaware of like his specific needs, especially went from going from like, oh, he doesn't have any vision at all, to like, oh, it's just delayed. So when we had the diagnosis of delayed visual maturation, in my head, I thought like, oh, acuity is the only problem that he's having. So like things will just have to be larger or close up or things like that. But then like after learning that he had CVI and learning about all the CVI characteristics, now I realize that his needs are like much more complex. We are more aware now of what can help him. We have like actual strategies that can help him, you know, like having high contrast or having things move or things that are backlit or shiny, like all of those things have just helped us have a better understanding of his needs. So we feel like we can be a better advocate for him, like with his teachers and in school or just anywhere that he goes.
So. That, I have a couple more videos that we'll look at interspersed here too, kind of break things up just a little bit, but why is it important to know more about CVI? Especially if you're not a teacher of the visually impaired. Well, for starters, CVI is now the leading cause of visual impairment in developed countries. And yes, visual impairment actually includes all of the other ocular and eye conditions. All of those kiddos with impairments, you know, having glasses or retinal conditions or dystrophies, near farsightedness. So CVI actually tops those. And we're like, how or why, how could this be when we haven't even been hearing about it? Well, it has a lot to do with the medical advancements and the success and increased survival rate of premature babies. We regularly now see preterm babies, right, that are surviving at 25 weeks, sometimes earlier. And whereas 10 years ago, that wasn't happening. There really has not been much training or attention to this area because they weren't really recognizing anything outside of the specialty hospitals on the East Coast. And then until relatively recently, like say within the last 5 years, now it's getting a lot of attention and it's being recognized, and resources and funds are being allocated to it. So the amount of research and knowledge and information has just exploded. Ironically, the way how we've learned about CVI, or how the education and information has been spread about CVI, is really not unlike that of COVID, how that has spread in the United States. First, it went on the East Coast, and then it hit the West Coast, and then Texas, and now finally we're in the Midwest. And literally, there has been no one in North Dakota who's been extensively trained in CVI. I'm kind of the Midwest token person in the grad classes that I'm taking. There has been a CVI, what they've called an endorsement session through Perkins, but it was just very kind of superficial because that's what they had to offer at the time. The courses that I'm taking now are through the University of Massachusetts in Boston, and it's a really rigorous course series, and we go into depth, and we're hitting, you know, the neurology parts of it, and the assessment parts of it. Just it's been just fascinating. It's been a lot of information. Last semester was kind of brutal actually, but this semester is a little better. So I feel really fortunate that I'm getting that education, but it's also kind of a double-edged sword because I really don't have anybody around that does CVI stuff, even at the blind school. So getting, and it's a hugely collaborative field. So getting people educated about it is really important. On Wednesday, I'm going to be giving an in-service to North Dakota DPI, just to kind of get, hopefully, North Dakota a little bit more up to speed. And then it's only been within the past couple of years that the area ophthalmologists have acquired training, and you know, that's been more in the cities or out on the East Coast. So since CVI must be diagnosed first by a medical doctor, that's put North Dakota just like way behind the 8 ball on that. We can suspect a CVI, we can accommodate like a CVI, but I'm not able to diagnose CVI. Therefore, CVI is often not identified, and it's often they're finding more and more been mistaken for something else like autism or ADHD dyslexia or emotional or behavior problems, because these kids are so frustrated and they're just not able to communicate or know how to relate. You know, what they're seeing, they don't think they're seeing anything different. Now, how would you know? I mean, how would you know if you're seeing red versus what somebody else is seeing as red? And that's really simplistic, but so with all of this new information developing as educators, we need more than ever to know about just about the brain. So
Jodie,
yeah,
can I ask who diagnoses it technically? Is it like an ophthalmologist? Is it like eye or neurology that diagnoses it?
that's a really good question, Kitty. Either one of those can. And
Gotcha.
there's a specialty of neuro-ophthalmologists. So, you know, we don't have those around here. We might have one in Fargo, but that's kind of a Minneapolis, bigger city kind of a thing. But yeah, those are the two optometrists, and they can refer on to a medical doctor.
Imaging So Jodie, one of the questions we had here was how do they diagnose it specifically? You know, we filled out that, or we went through that screener for one of our students down here in Oaks, but when they go to an ophthalmologist, is there, you know, do they do brain scans? Are there other neurological things that they do?
That's a really good question too. What they do often is an MRI, although sometimes the MRIs come out completely normal. They'll do a series of, you know, sometimes it's kind of the back door. So like we as a team would start gathering information and kind of putting it into a report and then saying to the parent, hey, you know what? Really think maybe it would be a good idea for you to like have your kiddo, you know, looked at. Now we can't like recommend that because we can't be, you know, liable for those appointments, but you know, as the parent gets more involved in that, you know, to an appointment, and sometimes we can go with them to the appointment, but then to really say to the ophthalmologist or the neurologist, you know, these are the kinds of things we're seeing, and all of these things kind of fall under this umbrella that, you know, there's something going on with the processing in the brain and how that this kiddo is interpreting what he or she is seeing. And so that's how, to get an official diagnosis, that's it. That kid has to get to a neurologist or to an ophthalmologist. And then, yes, they can do MRIs, and they have you know, they have their own series of things. And it's really difficult. It is, it's a really difficult thing to diagnose. Sometimes it's ruling out other things. One thing that I can say though, is that anything that you're going to do to help a kiddo with CVI, whether they turn out really having it or not, it's going to help them. Okay, so it's not anything we're going to do is not going to be harmful to them. So the strategies and interventions for CVI can significantly help kids. Did that answer your question, Oaks?
Yes, it did. Thanks, Jodie.
We can really, that's the difference really between the ocular or the eye condition and CVI, is that, you know, you can put correction on an ocular condition. You can put glasses on, or, you know, maybe that, or surgery, or that's kind of the way it's going to be. It's different with CVI. CVI is actually an area that we can help kids improve their vision. Which is a really exciting. Now, it doesn't mean that the CVI goes away, but we can be helping teach kiddos compensatory skills and ways to start connecting what their brain is perceiving to what's actually there. And it's a kind of tricky concept to wrap your mind around. The CVI, it doesn't go away, but the students can be taught how to lay down new pathways in their brain, like a neuroplasticity. Their brain learns different routes. And to make connections and other ways to make sense of what they're seeing. And I would say, Lindsay, we had a conversation about this not too long ago with a student. And I think you know exactly what I'm talking about there. It's like, oh, this is what this kid is having to do in order to make sense of what they see or to retrieve information. And once you kind of start seeing that, it's like, oh, that's pretty wild. This is like the CVI world can look like a kaleidoscope to a kiddo. And you're going to find out in later sessions that there's different levels of CVI, just like there are with, you know, or intellectual functioning or reading levels or whatever. You know, there's low functioning and there's higher functioning, and then there's really high functioning. A lot of the kids that get worked with are phase 1. They're really low functioning kids. They're just trying to get kids to notice things. You know, you want them to kind of progress through the phases. Sometimes, you know, they will, but then if we get into a phase 3, those are kind of the kids that are easy to miss because they function and they might not even know that they have CVI, but they know that they don't read as well as somebody else, or they don't understand why they're not really, or why math isn't really making sense to me the way it is to somebody else. Those kinds of things. So again, it's a neurological based disorder that can be the result of a number of medical conditions. Possible causes include developmental brain injuries, like something that happened, you know, in utero, a prenatal lack of oxygen, or head injuries. It's a very complex diagnosis, and the fact that many children have other disabilities, oftentimes in addition to CVI, including, you know, eye impairments, makes it even more difficult sometimes to make a diagnosis. Every child, they'll say that if you see one child with CVI, you've seen one child with CVI, because each child's brain is so different that it can just present very differently in every single kid. Each child can have his own unique combination of visual behaviors with preferences for light or color or more. And individuals who work with children with visual impairments, you know, now we know that there's certain kind of guidelines and strategies and characteristics to look for. CVI requires a different approach than other visual impairments. It requires a unique assessment in order to effectively adapt a child's home and its school, his school environment, because, you know, their whole environments are what we think of, and it's really typical, especially with, I would say, especially with preschool, daycares, and early entry, first, second, and third, and sometimes, you know, elementary grades is, you know, we want to make those environments stimulating and colorful and, you know, kind of give those kids lots of, because that's what we've been, you know, taught. And CVI is almost the opposite of that. When that starts happening, that overstimulation and colors, the kids, their vision just kind of shuts down. Their brain can't handle all of that information. So, in order to help a kiddo learn more about how to function in their home and school environment, including daily activities like getting dressed or getting around complex routes, reading, anything, functional modifications of the environment are important to help the child achieve greater progress and independence. And the knowledge of CVI is constantly evolving. In fact, just from last semester to this semester, we've been given updated information that some things that they thought were valid last semester, they're finding there's either additional information onto that or some things have changed. So it's crazy how much it's, you know, exploding in terms of that. Theories believed once to be true have been proven to be false in recent years, causing confusion among parents and teachers. So it's just really important to keep reading and keep up on things. And, you know, there's a lot of resources, and I'll be sharing some of those resources with all of you too. Any questions so far? We're at about already the halfway mark here. Okay. So this would be an example of what somebody might see with CVI. It looks like just blobby stuff. And this isn't maybe the whole picture of this, but what it ends up being in real life is it's actually a picture you could make out like a cow. So what a CVI kid might see is this. What other people might be able to perceive is this. And here's what I think I'm gonna try to, I'm gonna go here one more thing. CVI differs from an ocular impairment in some basic ways. An ocular impairment, that's where something is actually wrong with the eye or its structure. With CVI, there doesn't need to be anything wrong with the eye, but there's dysfunction with how the brain interprets what it sees, okay? So both ocular difficulties, so they're wrong, and CVI are visual impairments and can coexist. Okay. Because so many more premature babies are surviving, the population of children with brain-based disabilities just generally are increasing. And CVI is a product of that. It's a brain-based disability. So we're encountering more and more children in the education system presenting with these difficulties. CVI can be identified, assessed, and a child can be taught to see, and that vision can be improved. Okay, I'm going to try doing another video here that I think would be helpful. I might need Lonnie. Okay, this is, how do I do this one? It's a little. And I will apologize. Can you guys hear me yet? It's going to be in a foreign language, but there's subtitles, okay? Just so you know. And it's kind of cool to listen to. Let me know that you can hear this, okay? Once it's
Hoi, ik ben Christy. Hoi, ik ben Martine. Hallo, ik ben Floris. Er is niets mis met mijn ogen, maar toch zie ik niet alles.
Christy, Bertine en Floris hebben CVI. Dat is een cerebrale visuele stoornis, waardoor hun hersenen de beelden die via de ogen binnenkomen niet goed verwerken. Dit komt door schade aan of een abnormale ontwikkeling van hersendelen. Misschien heb jij nog nooit van CVI gehoord. Toch is het de meest voorkomende vorm van slechtziendheid bij kinderen. De kans is groot dat jij mensen kent met CVI en dat niet eens van ze weet. We leggen je graag uit hoe je wereld eruit ziet als je CVI hebt. Er zijn verschillende vormen van CVI. De meest voorkomende vormen van CVI hebben met aandacht te maken. Meestal is er te veel informatie om in één keer allemaal in detail te kunnen zien. Jij, of beter gezegd je hersenen, moeten selecteren. Dat gebeurt met aandacht. Datgene waar je aandacht aan geeft, zie je, al het andere eigenlijk niet. Maar hoe vind je datgene wat je wil zien? Voor het vinden is eerst overzicht nodig over wat er te zien is. Overzicht krijg je door je aandacht te verspreiden over een groot deel van het visuele veld. Daarmee krijg je een globale indruk van wat er allemaal te zien is. Deze visuele functie heet globale visuele selectieve aandacht. Vervolgens richt je je ogen op wat je meer in detail wilt bekijken en focus je al je aandacht hierop. Je zoomt als het ware in met je aandacht. Dit heet lokale visuele selectieve aandacht. Bij veel kinderen met CVI gaat het fout met het inzoomen of het uitzoomen. Een stoornis in globale visuele selectieve aandacht, het uitzoomen, resulteert in een gebrek aan overzicht. Je ziet geen verbanden. Bertine heeft een stoornis in globale visuele selectieve aandacht.
Ik zie juist te veel dingen, te veel prikkels om mij heen. Dat ik dat geheel niet meer snel bij elkaar krijg. Mijn zicht is eigenlijk een puzzel. Eigenlijk alles. Als bijvoorbeeld een gezicht zie ik bijvoorbeeld eerst de mond en dan pas stukje bij beetje wordt het één geheel. En zo heb ik dat ook in het verkeer. Ik zie bijvoorbeeld eerst de deur van de auto. Daarna zie ik de deurklink, de raam en pas daarna zie ik de hele auto. Daardoor duurt het ook later voordat ik iets waarneem eigenlijk.
Een stoornis in lokale visuele selectieve aandacht zorgt ervoor dat je niet goed kan inzoomen op kleine details, waardoor je ze niet goed kan zien. De wereld is een brei van onbekende details. Floris heeft een stoornis in lokale visuele selectieve aandacht.
En dat betekent dat hij in een grote brei de kleine details mist. Floris vindt het in een ruimte met veel visuele prikkels, vindt dit wel lastig om dingen terug te vinden. Ja, daar heeft hij meer moeite mee dan anderen. Wij merken dat Floris dingen moeilijker kan terugvinden doordat hij andere strategieën inzet dan dat wij eigenlijk doen. Hij compenseert veel meer, hij doet veel meer onthouden op basis van geheugen waar dingen liggen. Dus hij weet ook dingen wel heel goed terug te vinden, maar dat is niet omdat hij het goed ziet, maar omdat hij het met zijn geheugen probeert te compenseren. Floris die bouwt met de Lego eigenlijk vanuit de andersom-strategie. Hij bedenkt niet een plan en zoekt daar de blokjes bij, maar hij vindt toevalligerwijs blokjes en daar bouwt hij zijn constructie mee. Dus zo lijkt het alsof er weinig beperkingen zijn, maar het is best wel voor hem heel vermoeiend om op die manier te vinden wat hij zoekt. Als ik Floris ophaal van school, dan sta ik eigenlijk altijd op een vast plekje. Dus Floris weet waar hij mij kan vinden. En mocht ik onverhoopt een keer op een ander plekje staan, dan gaat hij rondlopen. En dan zie ik hem rondlopen en reageer ik daar weer op en ik roep hem. En dan vinden we elkaar altijd wel. Ik denk dat ik van jongs af aan al wel heb aangevoeld dat ik daar ook zelf rekening mee moet houden. Om hem duidelijkheid te geven van daar sta ik, daar kan je me vinden. En dan hoef je me ook niet te zoeken.
Datgene wat je selecteert, neem je waar. Dat je iets waarneemt, wil nog niet zeggen dat je begrijpt wat je ziet. Om te begrijpen wat je ziet, heb je waarnemingsfuncties nodig. De meeste kinderen met CVI begrijpen wel wat het is dat ze zien. Vaak hebben ze echter wel moeite met het begrijpen van visueel-ruimtelijke informatie. Het uitzoomen voor overzicht is hiervoor een voorwaarde. Om wiskundige figuren, letters of verkeer te kunnen begrijpen, moet je eerst de samenhang tussen de onderdelen kunnen overzien. Maar om de ruimtelijke relaties echt te begrijpen, heb je ook visueel-ruimtelijke waarnemingsfuncties nodig. Het gaat hierbij om inschatten waar dingen zich ten opzichte van elkaar bevinden, inschatten hoe lijnen of wegen georiënteerd zijn, en inschatten of iets beweegt. En zo ja, hoe snel en waarheen. Als die functies gestoord zijn, kan het op school en bij sport heel lastig zijn. En in het verkeer zelfs levensgevaarlijk.
Ik doe niet aan sport. Dat komt door mijn CVI. Ik zie de bal wel, alleen door de snelheid van de bal vind ik het moeilijk om te registreren van welke kant de bal komt.
Nou, ik denk dat sport en spelen best lastig is voor Christy. Dus alleen zien of iets beweegt, wat iets is, waar het naartoe gaat, is niet voldoende. Je wilt gewoon echt een bal weg kunnen schoppen, een pen op kunnen pakken, een bal kunnen vangen. Je wilt dingen kunnen doen.
Dat doe je met visuomotoriek. Met behulp van visuomotoriek kunnen we gedachteloos een kopje koffie oppakken of door een smalle gang lopen, zonder dat we eerst een grondige analyse hoeven te maken. Je ogen sturen je lijf, zonder dat je daarbij hoeft na te denken. Veel kinderen met CVI hebben een stoornis in de visuomotoriek, waardoor ze trager of onnauwkeurig handelen. Dit leidt tot onhandigheid en ongelukjes, zonder dat ze een stoornis hebben in de motoriek zelf. De stoornis zit in de visuomotoriek, de snelle automatische koppeling tussen zien en doen.
Hij ging te snel, dus ik kon niet goed realiseren waar kwam die. Komt hij dan daar, of daar?
Bij sommige kinderen met CVI zijn alle functies in orde, maar duurt het langer voordat het beeld doordringt. Ze hebben een stoornis in de visuele verwerkingssnelheid. Daardoor reageren ze later dan een ander. Ze zien die auto wel, maar wat later, waardoor ze te laat zijn met remmen. Of te laat om nog even snel over te steken. Ook kinderen met deze vorm van CVI hebben meer tijd nodig. Ook op school. Wat ook bij zien hoort, is dat je in staat bent om in je hoofd een beeld te vormen of te vervormen met je visuele werkgeheugen. Dit heb je bijvoorbeeld nodig om puzzelstukjes in je gedachten te draaien of om een route in je hoofd te maken.
Veel kinderen die CVI hebben, hebben verschillende vormen gecombineerd door elkaar. Zonder onderzoek is niet duidelijk welke functie of functies de problemen veroorzaken. Kinderen met CVI hebben gemeen dat kijken veel tijd kost en dus ook heel veel energie kost. Ik denk dat ze ook gemeen hebben dat ze proberen te compenseren dat de CVI niet opvalt. Nou, dat eist natuurlijk op een gegeven moment zijn tol. Als je het hebt over Christy bijvoorbeeld. In eerste instantie zie je niet dat ze CVI heeft. Ze kan het allemaal heel goed vertellen. En ze compenseert denk ik ook door haar sterke verbale kwaliteiten. Door het onthouden. Maar uiteindelijk als je haar vraagt om dingen letterlijk te doen, is het een stuk moeilijker voor haar.
Nou, op school is dat best wel vermoeiend. Vaak moet ik dan ook nog een uur doorwerken. Daar heb ik helemaal geen zin in. En dan denk ik zo van, laat maar, het lukt me toch niet. Ik stop er gewoon mee.
Aan de buitenkant zie je het vaak niet, dat iemand CVI heeft. Soms lijkt er op het eerste gezicht zelfs niets aan de hand. CVI heeft echter grote impact op het leven en de ontwikkeling van kinderen en jongeren. Ze kunnen niet zo gemakkelijk meekomen. In het verkeer, op school, met leren lezen, schrijven of rekenen. Maar ook in een sociale omgeving. En dat is frustrerend en soms ontmoedigend.
Ik heb eigenlijk mijn hele leven lang al smoesjes bedacht om niet mee te oefenen. Op de basisschool al, met buurmeisjes, buurkinderen. Op een gegeven moment waren de smoesjes op. Ik word daardoor eigenlijk ook niet meer meegevraagd vaak. Dus dan denken ze, nou, Petrine gaat toch niet mee.
Kinderen en jongeren met CVI voelen zich vaak onbegrepen en anders. Ze vinden het niet leuk om telkens om hulp te moeten vragen. Ze willen mee kunnen doen, niet opvallen. Als dat niet lukt, is dat natuurlijk niet goed voor het zelfbeeld en zelfvertrouwen.
Bij Visio ondersteunen we kinderen met een visuele beperking en hun omgeving bij de diagnose, de behandeling en de begeleiding. Thuis en op school kijken we samen hoe we de krachten en mogelijkheden van het kind zo goed mogelijk kunnen benutten en de zelfstandigheid kunnen vergroten. Kinderen met CVI, hun ouders en school staan er dus niet alleen voor.
Wil je meer weten over CVI? Om de Florissen, Bettines en Christies om ons heen beter te begrijpen en te kunnen ondersteunen? Lees dan ook ons boek CVI in beeld. Kijk op visio.org.
Het is lastig uit te leggen. Ik hoop dat mensen snappen waarom het soms misgaat bij me.
Okay, and I have, does anybody have any questions about that? I know that it gets hard when you're like, when it's in a different language.
The last thing I remember is lying here and my
This is more to give you guys just an overview again about different kinds of CVI and how it can manifest. It's not just kids. And this was shorter. This is kind of cool one though. And
the last thing I remember is lying here in my own bed. And I vaguely remember being taken to the hospital. And then after that, I don't remember anything. When I woke up, it was completely black. Absolutely black.
When Melina Channing was 29 years old, she was left blind by a stroke.
My eyes are perfect, but it's the damage that the stroke did to my brain.
It had completely decimated her primary visual cortex, that area at the back of the brain that processes all the information from your eyes. But then, a little while later,
I was giving Stephanie a bath and, running the tap, running the water. I see the water moving. But then they went and told all the doctors. They said it's her imagination. And then I started seeing the rain coming down from the sky, the windscreen wipers on, the steam coming from my coffee cup.
And though she couldn't see her daughter,
I would see her ponytail moving left to right. It seemed to be things that were moving, but nobody believed me.
She visited neurologists in Canada who showed her this weird shifting grid.
I actually started crying because I could see it.
It turns out there are these modules in the brain that are specialized for processing higher order aspects of vision, like recognizing faces or letters or motion. And it seemed that in Melina's brain, the information coming through the eyes had found a way to bypass that broken primary visual cortex and still get out to that motion module, a part of her brain that was apparently still intact.
It's just amazing what I can see. I can avoid obstacles and fill the kettle. I'm seeing colours better, but I can't see people. I don't see your face. I mean, you're there, but I just see the shadow.
That compartmental nature of vision that may have been her blessing is also proving to be a quiet curse.
Just now and again, it hits me, you know, why can't I see my daughter's face and who does she look like? And it's so frustrating. And then I think about it for a while and then I think, oh well, at least I'm here.
So those are just some different examples of people with CVI and how that it's different in every single situation. I'm going to right now, if you guys have any questions, I don't want to like overpower you with stuff. I'd like to show you a couple videos that are pretty short. We can finish them up another time too. But it just starts to give you an understanding of the brain. I'll start with this. I think, you know, it's 4:21. These are pretty quick. We won't have to do all of them. But I'd like you just to see this man is Dr. Gordon Dutton, and he is from Scotland, which is Europe is just way ahead of where we're at. And he does a really I think a really cool job. He's just kind of a cool man of explaining some things with the brain.
Hello, my name is Gordon Dutton, and this is the first series of what is going to be many sets of talks on cerebral visual impairment. The word cerebral comes from the word cerebrum, which is the big part of our brain at the top, the bit that some people think looks a bit like a walnut. To understand the cerebral visual impairments, you first have to understand a bit about the brain. To help someone affected by cerebral visual impairments, you need to learn to see and to be able to imagine, and so experience the world as they do. I believe that this can be achieved by anyone with the time and patience and motivation to learn. You don't need a background in science, and many best able to understand the CVIs are parents of affected children because they have lived with it day in and day out. So it makes sense to them in ways that others find a bit more difficult to grasp. I've worked with people with cerebral visual impairments for over 30 years, and I've seen their lives transformed when people around them, and even the people themselves, have come to understand the nature of their condition and how it happens and what to do about it. Hello, my name is Gordon Dutton. As you will remember from the last lesson, when you place your hands over your head like this, then your thumbs are over the back. They're over the occipital lobes of the cerebrum. This picture shows where they are on a diagram, looking at the brain from the side. The occipital lobes create the picture of what you are looking at. For now, we are going to assume that the person looking has not got any issues with their eyes, although in future sessions we will look at some of the eye conditions that are common with cerebral visual impairment. For those of you who have clear vision, look up and take an imaginary mental photograph of what you are looking at. Your photo or your mental image in your mind has colors, and it's clear in that you can tell things apart, even very small things. And now we come to the more difficult bit, because what we just explained is that the picture is being formed inside your mind. That's where the picture is. We've all been programmed to think that the world is out in front of us. It is, but the picture of it is inside our minds and it coincides with the world around us. And that is the key to understanding cerebral visual impairment.
Okay, I'm going to stop right there for today. I just think there's a lot of information, and I just wanted to kind of give you guys to start with, you know, like I said, an overview of what CVI is, and then to challenge you in the next week, those of you that have kiddos, that you're working with kiddos, yourself, you know, who knows? But just to kind of keep in the back of your mind, I wonder what this child is seeing. And maybe even asking that child to describe that to you, or giving some time to let that child really process, and then just be a little bit more mindful. We'll get into next week more of the characteristics and different aspects of visual behaviors that you can start looking for. But just in this week to kind of be thinking more about, gosh, are any of my students, were any of them preemies? Have any of them had any kind of anoxia, any kind of lack of oxygen at any time in their life? Have any of them been in an accident? Have any of them been abused, or, you know, had any kind of brain injury at all? If there's yes to any of those answers, you know, have they had meningitis? Have they, you know, did they have something funky going on, you know, with mom's pregnancy? There's things out there that, like I said, we're going to be seeing more and more of these kids. Right now, when I talk to my professors and my colleagues in my class, my classmates, I'm like, you know, we have very few CVI kids, and they just laugh at me. They're like, oh yeah, you have a lot of them, you just don't. They're just so so it's kind of up to all of us to start being the eyes and ears for that. So anybody have any questions? Anything?
Jodie, I was wondering, could concussions, I mean, trigger this, I would assume, since it's a brain injury, like severe concussions?
Right, and especially if there's successive, you know, more than one in a row.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, stroke, any kind of thing that can happen to the brain. Yep. And that doesn't mean that every single time something happens to the brain, somebody's going to have cortical vision impairment. I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying that it's a lot. Kids that we're seeing probably in high school, especially that are maybe struggling with reading, they might be those really high functioning kids with CVI that we just didn't know what it was. Or we think a kid is autistic, or they're having meltdowns because they're just so frustrated, or they're really anxious because they're in an environment where they can't discern what's going on around them. So it's fascinating when we start looking more into it. Next time we'll talk more about the causes and then the characteristics. So any other questions you guys have? Is it interesting to you? Are you finding it? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't want to bore you to death, and I don't want to overwhelm you, but I want you to know that there's so much out there. So thanks for joining today, and we'll sign off for today, and we'll see you next week. So,
Thanks, Jodie.
signing.
Thanks, Jodie.
Thank you. Good seeing everybody.
Thanks, Judy.
Okay.